Tom had long suspected the hiring process was broken, but it wasn't until the fourth disastrous hire in 12 months that he decided to confirm it. Lucky for him, the architect of that process was currently spreading artisanal butter on his toast across the break room. Tom sat down with the weight of a man about to make someone deeply uncomfortable. Tom found himself wandering into the dining room later than usual, his lunch hour overtaken by yet another crisis. Tom and Culum found themselves in the company cafeteria, the hum of microwaves and the clatter of cutlery providing a mundane backdrop. Spotting Culum from HR from the corner table, Tom hesitated for a moment. He didn't have the energy for confrontation, but this wasn't about confrontation. It was about clarity. Tom carried a steaming mug of coffee, while Culum cradled a plate of avocado toast that looked like it had been curated by an artisan. Sliding into the seat across from Culum, he offered a polite nod. "Culum, hope I'm not interrupting. Just thought I'd ask a quick question about the hiring process. If you've got a moment?" Culum gave a startled but obliging nod. "Of course, Tom. What's on your mind?" "Busy morning?" Tom began, his tone casual as he leaned against the counter. Culum nodded. "Oh, you know, same old, same old. Emails, meetings, the usual chaos. What about you?" "Same boat," Tom replied with a faint smile. "By the way, that toast looks fancy. Did they add something new to the menu?" "Yeah, a balsamic drizzle. Thought I'd treat myself," Culum said, chuckling lightly. Tom nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Nice. Anyway, I was wondering if we could have a quick chat about something that's been on my mind?" "Of course," Culum replied, his demeanour shifting slightly to one of attentiveness. "Well," Tom began, his voice taking on a measured tone, "I've been thinking about the hiring process. I was curious about the steps we follow, especially for the roles on my team." Culum straightened up, his interest piqued. "Sure, happy to walk you through it. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" Tom tilted his head slightly, as if considering the words carefully. "Not concerned exactly, but I thought it might be good to clarify a few things. Like, for instance, when we shortlist candidates, do we typically ask them to submit, work portfolios or examples of their work, anything like that?" Culum frowned slightly, as if surprised by the question. "Not usually, no. We mostly focus on their ability to articulate their skills during the interview." Tom raised an eyebrow. "I see. So, just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, we rely primarily on how well someone can perform in the interview itself? No tangible proof of the work beforehand?" "That's right," Culum confirmed. "The interview is designed to gauge their fit for the role and their ability to approach stakeholder engagement, amongst other things." Tom nodded slowly, his expression neutral. "Got it. And do we ever check with their references about whether they've actually followed through on what they claim? Or is that a step more of a formality?" "We do check references," Culum replied quickly, "but it's often more about confirming general suitability rather than verifying specific claims." "Interesting," Tom said, his tone light, but with an edge of curiosity. "I was just thinking out loud here, but don't you think it would be useful to include some kind of performance task or work sample as a standard part of the process? Just to see if they can actually do the job we're hiring them for?" Culum hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. It's something we've considered in the past, but it can be tricky to implement fairly across all roles. Sure, I can see that, Tom said, his voice smooth, almost conversational. But at the same time, isn't it possible that by skipping that step, we're only assessing their ability to take the interview and like nothing else? Culum opened his mouth to respond, but stopped, seeming unsure of how to counter the point. Tom continued, his tone still polite but probing. And speaking of the interview itself, do we have any differentiation procedures in place for neurodiverse or atypical applicants? For those who may, do well in a confrontational interview setting, but have the experience and qualifications that we need? We try to accommodate where possible, Culum said cautiously, but I think there's always room for improvement. Of course, Tom said with a nod. It's just something to think about, especially given how much weight we seem to place on the interview performance. I mean, when you think about it, teaching to the test develops people who are good at taking tests and not much else, right? That's a bit reductive, Culum said defensively. Tom raised an eyebrow, his tone still calm but with a razor-sharp edge. But isn't the interview-focused nature of the hiring process itself reductive? Tom asked, his tone still polite, but his words cutting to the core of the issue. We're boiling a person's capability down to how well they handle a single conversation. Does that really give us a comprehensive picture of their ability to actually perform the role? I mean, we've had 4 hires in the last year alone who talked a great game but couldn't deliver when it came time to actually doing the work. Wouldn't it make sense to balance the process with something more tangible? Culum opened his mouth as if to respond, but faltered. After all, Tom continued, the interview is one skill, one that has very little to do with the actual job itself. So, how does being great at a one-time Q&A session actually translate into sustained, high-quality work? Shouldn't we test their ability to do the tasks they face every day, rather than their ability to actually talk about the tasks instead? Culum shifted uncomfortably. I see your point, but implementing that kind of change would require buy-in from multiple stakeholders. Of course, Tom said, as if conceding the point. But wouldn't it be worth the effort if it meant fewer misfires in the hiring process? After all, the process is supposed to test skills and ability. And when the test fails to do that, is it even a test anymore? Culum looked down at his plate, silent for a moment. Tom took another sip of his coffee, letting the question linger in the air before continuing, his tone still mild but unrelenting. Just thinking out loud, but maybe we should consider what we are really assessing here. After all, interviewing isn't exactly part of the job. It's something you only need to do once. Tom's approach had been calculated, relentless, but impeccably polite. A masterclass in passive-aggressive precision. He hadn't shouted, hadn't berated, hadn't even raised his voice, but he made his point with surgical clarity, each question cutting deeper than the last. For Culum, there was no easy escape, no tone policing or bureaucratic deflection, just the undeniable reality of a broken system laid bare in a way that demanded change. Culum looked up, his expression a mix of frustration and contemplation. You've given me a lot to think about, Tom. Glad to hear it, Tom said with a faint smile forming. Enjoy the rest of your toast. As Tom left the dining room, he allowed himself the faintest of smiles. He didn't need to rub it in. The system would speak for itself. Some stories stay with you. If you're in the mood for another one that lingers, you know where to find it.